Good evening, everyone. I'm Vivienne Benesch, producing artistic director, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the fourth episode of our PlayMakers Keeping You Company series, Think Like an Actor, with the one and only Ray Dooley. After over 30 years and more than 100 productions as one of the great luminaries on stage at PlayMakers, in the classroom at UNC, and throughout the Greater Triangle community, he is now, unsurprisingly, a star of our virtual platforms. Speaking of virtual, we have just announced our updated season of virtual theater experiences, and we're calling it All Too Human. Some of you may recall that our season was supposed to be called All Too Human, the Art of Comedy. Well, with the world in the state that it's in, we thought that All Too Human was still a perfect expression of what we all feel right now, and a great title for what theater does best: reflect back to us our shared humanity. And that is very much still possible in the virtual medium. We'll kick off with an exciting encore presentation of Kane Smigo's poetic, timely, and pulsing Temples of Lung and Air. Tickets for that and for season-long packages go on sale on September 1st. For all the details, you can visit playmakersrep.org/human. And now, if you missed any of our previous episodes, you can view them anytime on our YouTube channel. You can also, we are placing a link to that in the chat box, and you can go to our website and find it there. Ray spent the first 3 episodes, which many of you are back for your 4th today, so thank you for being regulars here, talking us through various portions of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Tonight, we make a turn towards humor as Ray shifts us from Shakespearean tragedy to Shakespearean comedy with a little bit of Twelfth Night and Malvolio, a play and a role that he has performed twice here at PlayMakers. If you'd like to follow along, the text of the scene will appear in the chat. And while you won't be able to speak to me directly or Ray while we're talking or while he is teaching, we encourage you to find the chat button at the bottom of your screen, write in any questions you might have. You can do this at any point. It won't disturb us. And Rosalie, as usual, will be helping me to facilitate what questions to pass on to Ray in a short Q&A when he is done. So without further ado, it is my great, great privilege to pass this off to a man who can garner a guffaw from the slightest of gestures, Ray Dooley.
Thank you, Viv. Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me this evening. I think we're in for some fun, I hope. We're looking tonight at Shakespeare's comedies. And in approaching the comedies, maybe what we'll do is start with a kind of wide focus and iris our way down to, as Viv said, our production of Twelfth Night from 2017, where I played Malvolio. In thinking about this talk tonight, my mind went back to the year 1991, and we were in the dressing room after a performance of Molière's comedy, The Miser, in which I was playing Harpagon, the miser. And my colleague then, who was a grad student in our acting program, he's now the very successful artistic director, producing artistic director of Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, Blake Robison. And Blake was playing the young leading man. And we got to talking about how The Miser would make a great sitcom. And I remember Blake going, "Next week on The Miser." And I've obviously never forgot Blake doing that because it seemed so apropos. And I started to think, okay, so Molière, so we've got The Miser, we've got The Misanthrope, Tartuffe the Hypocrite, the Bourgeois Gentleman, the Imaginary Invalid. And you could see with each of these characters, they have these humors that stay with them. And you could see them, and you think like Seinfeld or Frasier, say, each of those characters has this kind of humor. And so it makes for a great sitcom structure, yeah? But then I thought, well, what about Shakespeare? And then I thought, well, not so much, at least to me. And that has always been of interest. And so we'll start with that. You know, the great British actor, Sir John Gielgud, said that style is knowing what kind of a play you are in. And so when you're thinking like an actor, it doesn't hurt to have a kind of overview of the kind of play that you are in. And then eventually, more specifically, the kind of production you are in. But let's start with this idea of what is a Shakespearean comedy, where unlike, say, a Molière play or the plays of the great comedies of the Restoration, or even George Bernard Shaw, the way comedy moved forward in the English theater was what we might call a city comedy. That is to say, people usually in a city, I don't know, Seinfeld, Frasier, I don't know, the comedies of Ben Jonson, who was Shakespeare's contemporary, moving forward into the Restoration, they all take place in the city. And the country is a place of buffoons, is a place to be made fun of, anything to do with a natural life. And yes, we can make an exception for Green Acres, but we remember that, of course, the comedy was, it was the city folks who were in the country, right? But otherwise, it's really this city comedy kind of term that moves forward in comedy. But where does these big, expansive, something like As You Like It, A Midsummer Night's Dream, where does that move forward in the tradition of comedy? Hard to come up with. The best I could do was something like The Princess Bride. I don't know. But in thinking like an actor, you go back and it's important to draw a distinction between information and opinion, particularly when you're working in Shakespeare, because over the centuries, there's been a lot of opinions from editors. And you've got to be real careful, as we saw, I think, in some of the Hamlet talks that we've done. But there are a few critics who you can pay attention to. And one of them is a man named Northrop Frye, F-R-Y-E, a great critic, he's Canadian. And in order to provide some context for us, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to read a little bit from Frye's book, Anatomy of Criticism, which has been a book that has been of great use to me in structuring lessons in my teaching with the graduate students, and also informing me of what kind of a play are we in. So we're doing a Shakespearean comedy, particularly an early comedy. And this is what Professor Frye says. Shakespeare's type of romantic comedy follows a tradition established by Peele and developed by Greene and Lilly. These are older contemporaries of Shakespeare who are writing a certain kind of play, comedy that is coming out of a pastoral tradition, which has affinities with the medieval tradition of the seasonal ritual play. So this is something buried deep in medieval society, coming from literally from the ground up. Not about sophisticated people in the city talking and wittily. This is coming from the ground up. We may call it the drama of the green world. Let's remember that phrase, green world. Its plot being assimilated to the ritual theme of the triumph of life and love over the wasteland. In The Two Gentlemen of Verona, the hero Valentine becomes captain of a band of outlaws in the forest, and all the other characters of the comedy, all the other characters are gathered into this forest and become converted. Forest. Forest of Arden. People going into the forest. Midsummer Night's Dream. People going into the forest. Do we see a pattern developing? This is called the green world in Shakespeare, what Fry has named the green world. And we see this pattern over and over in Shakespeare's plays. We see it even in the later plays like Cymbeline, where Imogen, the heroine, and it is often a female figure, goes off into, from the court in Cymbeline, goes off into, she's heading for, the name, Milford Haven, there it is. She goes through the forest and to meet her husband at this place, but she has to go through the forest where she suffers a kind of ritual death and rebirth. A ritual death and rebirth. Does that remind us of anyone? Well, it is close to the Greek myth of Persephone, who goes half the year down to the underworld and then is revived. It was the Greek way of explaining the seasons, essentially. And so we are in the seasons. The forest in this play, meaning the Midsummer, the Two Gentlemen, is the embryonic form of the fairy world of the Midsummer Night's Dream and the Forest of Arden and As You Like It, Windsor Forest in the Merry Wives of Windsor, and the pastoral world of the mythical seacoast of Bohemia in The Winter's Tale. And in The Merchant of Venice, it is Portia's magical house in Belmont. In Belmont is a lady richly left with the casks that we see there. So there's this place, this movement in many of Shakespeare's comedies from a civilized place out into the wild, and then where change takes place and then comes back. Now there are two of the comedies, if we can call The Tempest a comedy, which technically it is, along with Twelfth Night, where the entirety of the action takes place in that second world. Twelfth Night opens after the first scene, of course, If Music Be the Food of Love, so we have an invocation of music, a kind of magical thing there. The next scene is the shipwreck. And in The Tempest, right, the first scene, shipwreck. And so we are cast up in a kind of magical world, a different kind of world. What country, friend, is this? This is Illyria, lady. And what should I do in Illyria? This idea of the green world has deep, deep connections for us. We even see it to some degree nowadays in this way, that this is almost always young people who leave a settled place, go to a green world where transformations happen, and then they return. We might consider this the university experience, not this year, but in other years, yes. They come to, particularly here, the beautiful campus of UNC Chapel Hill, they come to the green world where they undergo these adventures and then return to what we might call the workaday world, the world of clocks and responsibilities, if you will, of getting on with the serious things about life after a transformative experience. Okay. And what to bring Professor Fry to a close, he says, talking about the endings of these kinds of plays, and we know that Shakespeare's, particularly his festive comedies, but almost all of them, end with marriages, with is the word theophany, the coming down of gods, actually heaven reaching down to bless marriages. dances, music and dance symbolizing the restoration of order in the world. And what Professor Fry says is the materials of the cognito, meaning the place where everybody recognizes who everybody else is, of Pericles or the Winter's Tale, are so stock that they would be hooted at like an old tale. He's quoting Ben Jonson there. Yet they seem both far-fetched and inevitably right, outraging reality and at the same time introducing us to a world of childlike innocence which has always made more sense than reality. A world of childlike innocence that has always made more sense than reality. So we're outraging our rational mind, but it somehow seems in our hearts inevitably right. And we come to a conclusion, which maybe has something to do, which is why we don't want to see next week's episode of Twelfth Night, because we've seen all there is to see it. The world has been restored. Now this strikes us very deeply. It strikes us very, very deeply. And maybe this is why Shakespeare's comedies continue to be produced. Shakespeare is by far the most produced playwright in the United States. And why did we keep bringing these plays back? It is something in them strikes a very deep chord in us, a sense of a world being restored, reborn, Persephone rising again in the spring. And this was a brief anecdote. A friend of mine was putting together some travel tales that he had done. He took a long walk in Yorkshire back in the late 1990s, multi-day hiking. And one day, he and his wife came upon a town where there was a Morris festival, literally a Morris festival going on. Now, what is that? Well, there's dancing and music, and it is something that has a history of hundreds of years. You can find it in Shakespeare, references to Morris dancing, May dancing. And this is coming from the medieval time and even further back, literally coming up from the earth. So it's taking in all of the human experience, not just the intellectual, political, wit, the rational mind. It's taking in all of us, all the way down to our feet, quoting what T.S. Eliot, right? Earth feet, loam feet. Eliot tries to get at this in, what is that, 4 quartets. This idea of reaching back to something, even in a civilized world, something that we are a part of that comes literally out of the earth. And so in Shakespeare's comedies in particular, the natural world is where the world is reordered correctly. Okay. Now, Twelfth Night, as we've said, starts in the green world. Viola has her shipwreck, and there she is. And she's told about Duke Orsino's court, and she says that she will go and pretend to be, as she says, an eunuch, and will serve the Duke. So this idea of our heroine, again, transforming in the green world. Of course, Rosalind dresses like a man. Indeed, Imogen in Cymbeline puts on men's attire. This kind of transformation happens. So then we are on our way in Twelfth Night. So, okay, a brief introduction to what kind of play we are in. A play where transformations can happen. And there's an element of magic to it. So let's iris down just a little bit to the actual production that we did here at PlayMakers in 2017. We had previously done the show in, I guess that was 92. And I had first come in contact professionally with the show in 79, at Stratford, Connecticut, the late lamented American Shakespeare Theater, where I was playing a small part and understudying the part of Malvolio. So I have a long experience with this role. So when you're thinking like an actor, so now you know what kind of a play you are in. So you're in a natural world. It's not going to be a city atmosphere where we'll be sitting and the clothing will be tight and I'll be looking for wit and all rational ideas. That there's going to be a largesse, if you will, to this world. And that, how does that inform an actor? It gives you a general sense of the palette, the imaginative palette that you get to draw on. We haven't started bringing that down yet, with just the imaginative palette that might be out there, and maybe also a physical palette, a kind of generosity of movement that might be possible. So in Twelfth Night, as we learned about the production that we were going to do, we learned that our director and his designers were going to set it in the French Riviera in the 1950s. And you saw the photo that accompanied we might say the pre-show tonight. That beautiful set that we had, big columns and an inners thing, and the chaise lounges, as if we were in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean. Okay. Now, in a play like this, or particularly in the later, what we call the romances, Pericles, Cymbeline, Winter's Tale, and The Tempest, because we are so close to what we might call the archetypal life, this, what I talked about things coming up, things being very ancient, things sitting way down in our brain, not up here in the frontal cortex, but way back here. A useful way to think of these plays is as a kind of dream. Why in Winter's Tale, it was once upon a time there was a king who got jealous. And why he got jealous, maybe not as important as you have to fulfill the requirements of you need to get jealous to set that play in motion. So we know in the structure of Twelfth Night that Malvolio is, to use the classic comedic structure, he's a kind of blocking figure. There is largesse around him. Sir Toby is a kind of lord of misrule. This is a type of figure that in fact, when my friend stumbled on that Morris festival, there was a guy who was the lord of misrule, and he had a very strange costume on, and he was around able to go around and insult people, and to behave in a very bad way, with the understanding that that was appropriate to this time of festival. And with these comedies that have come forward from this tradition, this blocking figure will eventually have to be overcome. So we know that Malvolio has to be the blocking figure. Okay, so we know that. It occurred, though, that as I was thinking about this particular production, Riviera, 50s, who is this guy? How did he get here? Why is he the steward in this house? How did that happen? Okay, what we do know is that that Olivia now, it's her house because both her father and her brother have recently died. Okay. So what if, in addition to knowing what Malvolio has to do in the course of the play, as an actor, the more specific you can make your backstory, the more coherent you have the more coherent the palette, the more specific the palette can be. So I started thinking, why? How did he come here? And in this way, William Ball talks about this in his book, A Sense of Direction, when he talks about the way actors' brains work, that we have two sides of we all do, but how it applies to the actors, there's the left brain, the rational brain, and then there's the right brain where the intuition drops in. Bill calls it universe. So in thinking about the character, I thought, okay, so let's say he's roughly my age. So that means that we're in Europe. Okay, so he's lived through the first half of the 20th century. Oh dear. Okay, so if that's true, all right, so how did he get through the Second World War? What happened there? And then this was truly out of the blue. I had recently seen the film, The Grand Budapest Hotel. Many of you have seen it, I'm sure. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. And for some reason, and this is where the thing that Bill calls universe, who knows how, I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Now you'll remember in that film, Ralph Fiennes plays Mr. Gustav M., I believe is his name. And he is a member of the Society of the Crossed Keys, which is to say, and he has on this lapel, the crossed keys, he's a concierge, right? And what we learn in the film is that there is an entire society of concierges who are just these fabulous people who can do no wrong and know everything and can make things happen and are the epitome of style and grace and knowledge and sophistication. And I thought, why is that in my head? And then, okay, wait a minute. What if this Malvolio that I was going to play, what if he had been an apprentice to Mr. Gustav? And what if, because of his personality, which we see in the play, Mr. Gustav, who knows, had said to Malvolio, you know, my boy, I don't think so. And the crushing of the spirit of Malvolio, that he was not going to pass the test, that he was a failure, that he washed out of concierge school. And that there was this family that came to the Grand Budapest Hotel sometimes. Then they had a place on the French Riviera, see? And the patriarch of the family and met Malvolio, and somehow it was he asked him if possibly he might come back and run the household there on the Riviera. So in building the character, because if you're playing Malvolio, you must do what the play asks you to do, which is to be the blocking figure, to be the butt of a lot of jokes, and to be snippy and rude with a lot of people and full of self-love. But that kind of behavior comes out of bitterness, I think, if you're going to make it real. And so you can go ahead and play the shell of the character, the idea of the character, play the task of the character to be snippy and nasty, not nasty exactly, but to be above, to think of oneself as being above. But if you can make that really specific as to why. Malvolio is full of self. He thinks he's better than everybody else. And that life has conspired against him in the person of Mr. Gustav, who he is now going to show. I'll show him. I will make a success of it. And so he's come to a much less prestigious job. And to remind myself of that, Rosalie, can we go to our picture number 2? And you will notice here, this is a picture of me, and you will notice on the lapel of the costume, what symbol is there? It is the symbol of the cross keys. This is our genius costume department here, our wonderful graduate program in costume production. They made, this was the costume, and I asked for them to develop the symbol of the crossed keys that Malvolio has taken and is wearing, even though he doesn't deserve it. And so every night when I put on that clothing, I would look at those crossed keys, and the feeling and my resentment, and of course, you know, Mr. Gustav is his ideal. And as has been said, an ideal is also a judge. And so I would always have that image of Ralph Fiennes, yes, in that movie, which is in its way a wacky comedy, which also helped with playing a comedy. And so on the lapel of the costume were the crossed keys that I could look at every night and remind myself of the failure and how I was going to overcome that failure no matter what, Mr. Gustav. So that's one way of getting into the character. Thank you, Rose. Thank you. All right. So that's the premise for what we were doing. And we, so you saw the set. Good. So let's now really iris down. And we'll go with the scene, the famous scene, the letter scene, the Gulling Scene, as it is known. It's very interesting in the play. Malvolio several times is referred to as a gull. And the other character in the play that's referred to as a gull is Sir Andrew Aguecheek, who is the gull, meaning the dupe of Sir Toby, who's taking advantage. Sir Toby, a kind of lesser Falstaff, who is this lord of misrule figure, an old and venerable symbol in these medieval plays where at festival time, the world gets turned upside down. So let's look, and we'll have the text of the play, and we'll think a little like an actor here in Act 2, Scene 5. So we've already seen Malvolio be rude to young Cesario, which is Viola in disguise. We've seen him come in and break up the late night party. My masters, are you mad, or what are you? Breaking up that party and saying, Sir Toby, you know, if you would like to leave, my niece, your niece, my lady, would be very happy to bid you adieu. So we've seen him do that. And we know that the other characters are eager to get back at him. And at line, so we meet here for the first time Fabian, who is seemingly an outdoors type guy. He's interested in this thing, bear baiting, which is a terrible practice, but it's an outdoor, very bloody situation. And Malvolio put a stop to anything, and the idea there is anybody having any fun, Malvolio is going to put an end to it. And so he wants his revenge, and of course Sir Toby wants his revenge because Malvolio has spoken out of. So Toby says to him in that other scene, "Art any more than a steward Dost thou think thou art virtuous? There shall be no more cakes and ale. So Sir Toby wants his revenge. Sir Andrew will do anything Sir Toby says. So they're setting up a deal. Now Maria, the brains of the outfit, the maid of the house, she can write very much like her lady, Olivia. So she has written a letter, and Maria enters, and she says, "Get ye all three into the box tree. Malvolio's coming down the walk. He has been yonder in the sun practicing behavior to his own shadow this half hour. Observe him for the love of mockery, for I know this letter will make a contemplative idiot of him, close in the name of jesting." So the men all hide. In our production, it was up in the house, looking out around the pillars. Usually, it can be in our production in what was that, 73, I believe, or 72. I think it was 72. There were these box trees that were rolled around the set. Maria takes the letter, and she says, "Lie thou there, for here comes the trout that must be caught with tickling." Okay, so that's the setup. We know that Malvolio has been practicing behaviors to himself, to his shadow. So how to stand, how maybe to hold his hands, all of that. And this is what we know. So Malvolio now is going to make an entrance. So you're playing Malvolio, thinking like an actor. You think, okay, I've got an entrance to make. And as in our production, many of you may remember, I came on from what we call the center vam, which is to say, up those steps that the audience comes in to access the theater. Now, there's an old school actor craft technique that I think is wonderful and use whenever I can, which is to say, when possible, begin a physical activity off stage and carry it with you on stage so that you have started doing something real off stage and you continue to do it as you make your entrance so that the physical being, the kinesthetic being, is simply doing something real. And suddenly, there you are on stage. And off you go. So I was thinking about this. What do we do? What could I be doing? I'm simply entering. What could I've been practicing behaviors. What could I do? And one day, again, you know, that other part of the brain, I thought, well, what about an emery board? What about I'll be filing my nails? Because Malvolio is very fastidious about his appearance, yeah. And so that's what I did. I came on and I was filing my nails. Now my first line is, "'Tis but fortune, all is fortune." So if you're an actor, 2 questions. Who are you talking to and why? What do you want back? Now, as we talked at length in our first time together, that to be or not to be speech, when an actor comes on stage, usually a good place to think about starting is that it's with the audience. And you are wanting something back from the audience. Hey, folks, to be or not to be, that is the question. And you play that scene with the audience, running your action, as we call it, through the audience. That didn't seem right here. Thought, okay, so the other rule of thumb with a soliloquy, you can be talking to the heavens, this is true, but usually you notice that in the text, and that's not going on here. But otherwise, how we teach this, and it's always good to follow your own advice, is you split yourself in half. And then I thought, yeah, that's probably right. And Malvolio has become his own best friend because he has no other friends. Because no one is, of course, no one is. good enough to be Malvolio's friend. So I thought, well, he has an invisible friend. It's himself. He is there, and he talks to himself. Okay, but what is he talking about? Is there something specific? So I came up, and what I was looking at, filing my nails, was this beautiful set, which in my mind became the villa, the Mediterranean villa, which Olivia now owned and was operating. The villa represented wealth, status. And so the site of the villa, why isn't it mine? 'Tis but fortune. All is fortune. And we're in. It's just bad luck. The world has conspired against me. I should own that. I should be that person who owns that. I deserve that. Why isn't the world ordering itself to make that possible for me? So on we go. Now, the question then became, and this was a rehearsal question, why am I there? Why on the patio? I thought, what could we do? What could be there that I could be working with? And then thinking about what happens, well, drinks, a drink cart. And we, I believe I asked for that in rehearsal, and we got a drink cart that was then downstage, technically downstage left. As I'm coming toward the stage, it's down here to my right. And so to give myself a reason for being there, it was like that it was time to refresh the drink cart, because cocktail hour was coming up, and we needed to make sure everything was full and ice was there and all of that. So that's why I was there. Okay, so I had a thing now to pull me into the space. So 'tis but fortune, all is fortune. And Mariah once told me, she did affect me, telling myself this, she being Olivia. And I have heard herself come thus near that, should she fancy, it should be one of my complexion. What should I think on't? And now for fun, we actually have a clip of picking up our production at this point. Now, we made some heavy cuts in the text, but I thought it might be fun in the interest of time to watch this next little section. What you're going to see are the guys hidden up in the upstage. And they, of course, are interjecting, which the audience hears, but of course Malvolio doesn't. So it's important for the actor playing Malvolio to be involved in something. So it becomes even more credible. Of course, the convention is that he doesn't hear. But Rosalie, can we go from the point of our show where Malvolio says, he says, what should I think on't? To be Count Malvolio. Do we have? Yes, here we go.
Count Malvolio. Ah, rogue! Pistol him! Having been 3 months married to her, sitting in my state.
Oh, for a stone bow to hit him in the eye.
Calling my officers about me in my branched velvet gown. Having come from a daybed where I have left Olivia sleeping.
Fire and brimstone!
Oh, peace! And then to have the humor of state. And after a demure travel of regard, telling them I know my place as I would they should do theirs, to ask for my kinsman, Toby.
Bolts and shackles!
Peace! Now. 7 of my people with an obedient start make out for him. I frown for a while and perchance wind up my watch or play with my some rich jewel. Toby approaches, curtsies there to me.
Shall this fellow live?
Now he's deeply in. I extend my hands to him thus, quenching my familiar smile with an austere regard of control.
Does not Toby take you a blow of the lips then?
Say, cousin Toby, my fortunes having cast me on your niece, give me this prerogative of speech.
What? What?
You must amend your drunkenness.
Up, Daphne!
Patience. Besides, you waste the treasure of your time with a foolish knight.
That's me, I warn you.
Yes, thank you, Rosalie. Okay, so pretty. That was the way we played the scene. Now, what was going on there, over at the drinks cart? This all developed in rehearsal. Usually, and you'll even see this in some scripts, because the editors have put in stage directions. Malvolio says, I send for my kinsman Toby. I frown the while, and play with some, and usually there's a chain, a steward thing that he has, and he involuntarily grabs it and goes, oh, some rich jewel. But with the drinks cart, I had been to the drinks cart previously, and I'd moved across the stage, and I think it was like an opener, a bottle opener or something like that, something showing that what my job was. And so I looked and said, and perhaps play with my, and that reminded me of my low estate as the steward. And I put the bottle opener down, and then for rich jewel, what I saw was some sliced oranges. So I picked up an orange wedge, play with some rich jewel, and took a big juicy bite of the orange because it, bright color. And also I was trying to get at an active way of showing that this was a guy of appetites that he had patted, that he had beaten down, so he could be this put together kind of person. So it was the big rich jewel. And then taking the bar towel, wiping my mouth with the bar towel, refolding the bar towel and hanging it on the bar as a way of, again, indicating what was going on underneath that very proper and austere, as he says, the austere regard of control. What was going on under that? So the bar, the drinks cabinet became a way of anchoring in the space, giving an ongoing sense of activity to the scene, taking my attention. As you see, the guys behind me were just going to town back there, and I could face away and have something to do, which makes it yet more credible for them to do what they were doing. They were even taking film. I had a small 1950s camera taking film, and it was pretty outrageous during that time. So that takes us up to the point where Malvolio discovers the letter, which is a whole other famous endeavor. So we are at about time. So I think we'll stop there for now. And I hope you've enjoyed our irising in from what kind of play are we in all the way down to specific business, like taking a big bite of an orange slice in the middle of a production of Twelfth Night. So thank you all for that. Good. Viv, come on back. Have we lost her? Viv.
I'm muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
My apologies. I was saying that I have a feeling we need a second episode on this to go into the actual speech. But you know, Ray, I'm going to start with this. What's amazing about this evening is that as opposed to the way you approached Hamlet and sharing Hamlet with us, which was entirely text-based first, today you took us on this amazing journey of the character, the imaginative work that you did to place yourself in the world of the play. And I think that's true whether it's comedy, tragedy, all over, but it's such a gift, again, in thinking like an actor, to see that both sides are always necessary.
Yes.
In that way, and to hear you sort of expand on this was really, really interesting. And I learned a whole bunch of things I don't think I ever knew about how you came up with these things. But tell us, for me, like that imaginative work, have you come up against places where it runs up against the text? You're like, okay, I've got this, and this is his backstory, and
right.
Oh dear, now
right.
what?
Well, right, and the answer is probably, but you must serve the play first. Now, a danger with Twelfth Night, and I didn't get to talk about this, but a danger with Twelfth Night is the difference between modern sensibility and Elizabethan sensibility. Malvolio is a gull. He is a figure of fun. He gets locked up in a cell and made to treat it as if he is crazy, insane, because of his behavior. And he's treated really badly. And there can be a way with Twelfth Night, which is the last of the early festive comedies. Right after this, we go to All's Well That Ends Well, Measure. Things get really weird after this. And with Twelfth Night, you can lean into the melancholy. Remember the music, Come Away Death, The Rain It Raineth Every Day. And if Malvolio, if the audience feels sorry for Malvolio, the play goes out of balance.
Yeah.
And this is where the director has to come in and say, that's wonderful, great, and let's move it back over here, you know. I remember once, again, an anecdote, this is 1970, oh my God, 8 maybe, doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and an understudy went on as Thisbe in the period, you know, in Midsummer. This was in New York. And for some reason, he thought that Thisbe was the great tragic actress of all time. And when it came time, you know, Bottom as Pyramus has died, and Thisbe came out, and he actually tried to play it like straight tragedy. And it got really weird. So you have to watch this. The same thing can happen in Merchant of Venice, and often does, because Shakespeare, he says, okay, I'll write you a Shylock, but I'm going to write you a Shylock, and I'm going to write you a real human being. Mm-hmm. And you are going to have to deal with trying to balance the play between sympathy for Shylock and this theoretically comic structure that leads to a happy ending. Similarly, here with Malvolio, if it tilts out of frame and you start playing Malvolio for sympathy, it won't work. So that's where that backstory has to give way to what has to happen to make the play work.
Mm-hmm. When I'm sort of curious about the evolution of your Malvolios, sort of given different worlds of the plays, and what you took consistently and what was different.
Yeah, it was what? So 92 to it's almost like 18, 16, 17 years later. Interestingly, both times when I came out in my yellow stockings, it was a golf outfit. Because it was set, the first one was set, it was more of an abstract setting. It wasn't, you know, this place at this time. It was kind of a mythical, dreamlike, Martin Platt, my dear friend Martin Platt directed. And it started with the boat coming on. We saw the boat land, and it was, the costumes were fantastical, but I was in black in that. And for the performance, there were elements that were the same. There were comic bits in the first one that didn't fit in the second one, and a few that that we found anew in the second one. But I was a different actor, I guess is the answer to your question. Yeah. I was 16 years more experienced, and so it was probably more specific and more direct and simpler and more efficient to get what I needed to get done. Just you learn stuff as you work.
Wendy Watt asked, could Shakespeare's clowns be a prelude to Monty Python? I think.
Yeah, I think they are. They're part of the same tradition, for sure. Yes, I wouldn't say that Monty Python couldn't have existed without Shakespeare's clowns. They kind of run on parallel tracks. Yeah, for sure. But that kind of music, that kind of craziness goes back, you know, again to the really back to the Roman comedies, which of course Shakespeare is building on too. I didn't want to do the whole thing on the antecedents of Shakespearean comedy tonight, but he's also, of course, building on Plautus and Terence and those kinds of things where we first run into the blocking figures and the Greek Aristophanes. It's all there, and it all comes right up into the Ministry of Silly Walks. You know, I mean, it just does. And yeah.
Absolutely. What the question, you know, a lot of people say comedy is much harder than tragedy. Is that different in Shakespeare's world or the same?
Yeah, I think it was Edwin Booth who said, dying is easy, comedy is hard. And I'm going to tell an anecdote that I think says a lot about this, about how to do comedy. The famous Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne, the great king and queen of the American early to mid part of the 20th century on Broadway. They were doing one of these kind of refined comedies. And there was a moment in the play where Alfred asked for a cup of tea, and it brought down the house, whatever the setup was. And they were playing it, and after a couple of weeks, the laugh went away. He wasn't getting the laugh. And he said, Linny, why am I not getting the laugh there anymore? She said, well, Alfred, darling, you used to ask for a cup of tea, and now you're asking for a laugh. Which, this is the key to comedy. You have to be human first, and then the comedy happens. But if you go out and play the comedy, unless it is, you know, pure out farce, and you can add elements in to it. And we were using some farcical elements, I think, with the way the guys were coming down, filming the whole thing. This is actually pretty funny. But you must first be real. And so those little details that I tried to put in with the drinks cart in particular, and here's a guy, he's just filing his nails. You know, it's a human thing. It draws the audience in. It makes the person seem human. And then the comedy comes out of the humanity.
I cannot believe it is already 8 o'clock. I know the time, as usual, I could listen to hours more of this. And luckily, next month, we get to hear you again. So looking hugely forward to that. And really, so many questions have come up. So I would love to continue talking about the comedies. It's actually really interesting to go back and forth between the two. And again, if you have questions, thoughts from the audience, please send them in a chat, send them in an email. Just want to say again, a huge thank you to you, Ray, and a thank you to everyone watching, because if you're watching tonight, you are aware of what a special gem we have in having Ray Dooley as a company member. but you are probably also aware that the performing arts right now are in an unprecedented moment, but we are figuring out how to be in a time of perhaps hibernation, but also of rediscovery. And we know nothing replaces live theater the way it does, and we can't wait to be back there. But in the meantime, thank you for tuning in, and we hope that you will continue to tune in and that you will come and join us for the series of theatrical experiences that we have virtually for you coming up all season long. And if you can, and many of you have already, so thank you for anything you have been able to donate and give to PlayMakers. But if you haven't yet, and it is possible for you, no gift is too small. Really, it is a cliche to say, but it is so true now more than ever. We are all in the performing arts figuring out our way forward, and PlayMakers is along the ride for that. So do not forget to check our website to find out all about what's coming on. Thank you for being here. And Ray, can't wait to see you next month. And to all of you, stay well, stay safe, and see you very soon. Vivienne Benesch saying, I'm a playmaker, and your sign off, Ray.
I'm Ray Dooley, and I'm a playmaker.
Good night, everyone.